Well, this is a book this is my ninth book, and they're not thrillers, they're not novels, they're books of history, they're books of fact. This one I discovered when I was writing the 70th anniversary book on the Cockleshell Hero raid in Bordeaux in December 1942. 3 people flipped across my vision and vanished, and that's the way they'd have stayed had it not been for the fact that somebody contacted me about 4 years ago with a box of documents. Turned out to be the papers of the greatest, one of those 3, the greatest of the SOE agents ever dropped into France. After that, I discovered the memoirs of a Gestapo officer who was chasing him. Only memoirs ever written by a Gestapo officer. Now I could put together this extraordinary story of the intimate lives of 3 people. The SOE agent, a man called Roger Lannes, arguably the greatest SOE agent we ever dropped in. The man who betrayed him, a Frenchman. And this extraordinary, unusual Gestapo officer, never killed anybody, never tortured them, brilliant counterintelligence man. And, you know, what they did, how they avoided each other, how they tried to capture each other, how they slept with each other's girlfriends, quite a lot of that on the book as well. Their intimate lives, what they thought, where they succeeded, where they failed, and I've written the book about it, so it's called Game of Spies. It's about, I think, probably it's the first genuine, intimate portrait of what it was like to be a secret agent on a day-by-day basis in France.
What's the enduring appeal of the world of spies, a world that's constantly developing, as we see nowadays with the internet taking a much larger role?
I think there's a romance about it, and it's one indeed which, in a certain part of my life, I was not too distant from. But I don't think that's, not for me anyway. The spy is, a secret agent is always a fascinating thing. But I think we are fascinated by the Second World War because it's almost within touching distance. You can still find some people alive. Our parents, my parents and our grandparents went through it, and they lived an existential existence, literally, by the day. Whereas we today live in such cotton wool lives, we are fascinated by that. By the way, my secret agent comes through Gibraltar. He stopped, as so many others would have been, at the border. They suspect him of being a German agent because he's carrying a gold watch, which then turns out not to be a German agent's watch. And he's incarcerated in Gibraltar before leaving for the UK from a plane from Gibraltar Airport that flies back to Britain in the early months of 1943. And my next book, by the way, is going to have it's going to be a feature of Gibraltar as well.
Will this, your visit here feed into that at all?
Funnily enough, the very building we're sitting may well play a very significant part. There's a real question as to whether the great, very great German head of the German intelligence of the Abwehr, Canaris, Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, met the then head of MI6, and the theory is he met in Gibraltar, in which case he probably met in this room, or possibly the governor and I, who's a great friend of mine, are off to have a look at the governor's cottage. It may well be they met there, and what I'm hoping is that by looking at the old archives, I can prove that he did come here.
You've written about the politics of both the past and the present, so how is this informed by your own long career in politics, the military and so forth?
Well, quite a lot, but I mean, here's the extraordinary, bewildering thing in many ways. You know, politics is just in complete turmoil. Almost everything you thought you knew about politics for the last 40 years has now changed. This is terra nova, this is completely new world, and it's fractured, it's broken, it's bewildering, it's puzzling. It is, in my view, very threatening and very dangerous. We seem to be, in these days, those who shout loudest with the ugliest voices. You think Farage, you think Trump, you think Marine Le Pen, or those at the most extremes, Mr. Corbyn. Maybe even the present Conservative government are the ones who get traction. The calm voice of reason in a frightening age is not. And so you're always puzzling about this. By the way, one of the conclusions I've reached on doing the research on my next book, which is very much about it begins in the 1930s, is that absent the fact that we don't have a madman with an army dying to go to war, what will happen if we get Trump, God only knows, this is an age that reminds me enormously of the 1930s, and I think it potentially one of the most dangerous ages I've ever lived through.
How do you see things progressing?
I think we'll get an election probably in Britain in May. I think that the Tories are now 47 points to Mr. Corbyn's 29. The temptation to have an election then will be irresistible. I think the terrible price of Brexit, and I think Brexit, in my view, was the most notorious example in history, certainly modern history, of a great nation doing self-harm to itself. I think the economic costs of that come into roost very heavily. I think they'll undermine the government consistently over the longer periods. So my guess is Mrs. May will go in May. and then we'll see what happens. From the present position, she looks as though she can get back. What Britain lacks is a decent opposition. What it lacks is any centre ground that is represented by a political party or a grouping of political parties, and I'm trying to put that together now.
The Lib Dems, could be said, were not doing great after the last election. So
We're not doing great. We were roadkill after the last election. We're less than 8. But you know, I'm very proud we took part in the coalition. I'm in politics for the national interest. The nation needed that. I knew we'd suffer as a result. Didn't think we'd suffer that much. But I don't renege on that one little bit, and I think we are already beginning to see the dividend from acting in the interests of the nation rather than of our party and in a responsible fashion. And hence the latest by-election in Witney, Mr. Cameron's old seat, where the Tories have had that majority substantially reduced, amazingly reduced, and the Lib Dems came very close to beating them. I think the party's on the move now.
Has the party found a sort of new sense of purpose, a new platform and demographic with
No,
its stance on the referendum?
Well, that's an interesting question. It's a very interesting. Yes, probably. I think the referendum. We've always been a pro-European party, but the referendum has defined that position. And the 48% who voted to remain, and I was one of them, and I'm passionate about it, and I feel dejected and deprived. I remember coming to Gibraltar 2 weeks before and feeling the mood in this country so strongly as well. So, yes, I think it probably has helped to define our position in a turbulent age. And my guess is that the next election, if there is one in May, will be predominantly on the issue of Europe, of what kind of Brexit. And I think we'll have a very clear definition on that, which Mr. Corbyn's Labour Party certainly doesn't. And I think we're going to benefit from that.
Well, you mentioned you've come to Gibraltar at quite a crucial time. So what's your take on the ROC and the situation it finds itself in, both with Brexit and Spain now pushing joint sovereignty again?
I think, well, Spain was bound to do that. I mean, they're bound to be opportunistic. My guess is as we come into the negotiations, they will flex their muscles. They'll make life a bit difficult for a couple of 3 days, maybe longer. It'll be all unpredictable. It'll be to remind us how strong their bargaining power is. I think we should just ignore that and get on with business. Look, I love this place, and it's in many ways more English than the English, more British than the British, and that's why I adore it. It's like going back a little into, not in terms of but you know, in terms of the courtesy and the respect for others and so on, and the law and order. So I really love it, and I think it's you know, I remember Gibraltar came here first in 1960. I remember Gibraltar at the time when the border was closed for 17 years, thanks to Franco. Don't want to go back there. On balance, I don't think we will. But at present, we're living in...
threats of that from the Spanish front?
Well, yeah, but they're bound to be. I mean, I think we should just be calm, insofar as we can be. I think we should understand that this is what happens in these circumstances. In the end, I feel certain that if rational minds prevail, and I hope they will, then rational outcomes will be which is in the best interest of both sides. And it's not in the best interest of both sides to go back to disruption on that border, whatever the circumstances. But we are in uncertain times. I likened it to a friend of mine the other day of the Roadrunner cartoons. Do you remember the Roadrunner cartoons? And then he goes, shh, and then he comes off the cliff, and he's sort of there. We're at that moment. We don't know what's going to happen. And I think we're going to have to keep our nerve, as Gibraltar has always done, keep our nerve, make sure that we're as strong as we can be, and look to the future in almost any circumstances with confidence, because you have in this country an economic centre, a cultural centre, a British centre, and I think that is important. And I think you have immensely talented people. Whatever the world holds for Gibraltar, those three ingredients should help them quite a lot.
What is your party's stance on the sovereignty of Gibraltar and on these joint sovereignty proposals?
Well, the sovereignty is not up for negotiation. Is absolutely clear. Look, I believe very simply in the self-determination of peoples. If the people of Gibraltar want to join, in whatever circumstances, Spain, it's up to them to make that choice. If they choose to do so, I would honour it. I don't see it in imperialist terms at all. I see it in freedom terms. So if they should do so, that's the moment we can talk about this. But absent that, you can't take a people like this by force or by storm or against their wishes or will. And it's very foolish to seek to try.
And finally, how have you been enjoying the festival so far in this trip to Gibraltar?
I adore these festivals, and you know, Ed, the governor, and myself are very old friends from SBS days. Just lovely to be with him and his wife, and to be in Gibraltar again in this magnificent building. So it's great to be here.